Yeah.
Been a hot week, few weeks.
Hot. This Hangout is live. Hangout on air is going away later this year. For more information about streaming.
That makes me, on a scale 1 to
Oh.
10, 10 for nervous.
Yeah. If you got this part of the show, you've got the live unedited edition, Cyber Frontiers. It is June 19th. So YouTube is sending me to a page. What? Because they just said Hangouts on air is going away later this year. For quick streaming, try youtube.com/webcam. Oh, so maybe I'm have to figure out a new way to do this, Christian. I kind of thought, okay, I don't know. Ooh, this could be bad. What does later this year mean? Everybody's been saying this, and I haven't been believing them.
An arbitrary point in time in which
I know.
Google determines.
I know. What does that mean? Hey, Ken, Joe, what is that? I wonder what that means.
Maybe it's like with Google Talk, how it eventually migrated into Google Hangouts, but you didn't lose the capability of Google Talk. Yeah. They just rolled it in.
Well, and I wonder if it'll be YouTube Live, if this will get rebranded like YouTube Live or something. I don't know.
I hope not, because YouTube Live, from what I remember, is their TV service, or YouTube TV.
Well, YouTube TV is a TV service. Shoot. Well, that means I'm actually, now at work, I'm kind of covered. We have on 24, and I can just use that. That's not such a big deal. It's kind of a pain. Like, it's been so good to have this. The other option would be I just have to go OBS or one of those services where I capture the cameras and then I send it into YouTube that way. That's also, or I might have to buy, I don't know if I'm going to have to buy the G Suite or something to make it work. So it's saying go to youtube.com/webcam. Oh, what does that mean? And then when I go there, of course, it says, well, this machine doesn't have a webcam on it. Can't find the camera because I don't have one on the machine I'm looking at it. Here, let's try this really quick. Nothing like troubleshooting it live, but hang tight. youtube.com/webcam. This really affects those who are listening live tonight. So, yeah. Webcam stream info. Create a title. Public. Share for later. More options. Advanced settings. Allow chat. Well, okay. So it looks like it looks like it'll probably get converted over to this webcam option. youtube.com/webcam. And you can schedule it, and it grabs your camera and stuff. There's some advanced settings. You can create a title. Webcam stream info. They have webcam. They have stream. Let's see what this is. A new stream. Oh, well, this is a whole new service. Yeah. So I don't think it's going away. I just think it's changing the service. Okay, I'll figure it out another day. I've lived through 9 years of this. I think I'll be fine. Ken's wondering. So Ken, I just got a note that Hangouts, Google just let me know this Hangouts on air is going away later this year. So it was like, what does that mean? What's later this year mean? Christian, I'm looking at the news that we're looking at, and holy cow, things are out of control.
Dude, it was a wild 6 weeks. Yeah. I regret that we missed a midpoint to really dive on some of these things, because it's just been like one after another.
I know.
Pretty scary and exciting all at the same time, I guess. But plenty of rabbit holes we can go into tonight.
Super. All right, let me open things and we'll get started here. Let's see, we're at 8 to 12. Okay. This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Cyber Frontiers, show number 56, recorded on June 19th, 2019. Here in Cyber Frontiers, we explore cybersecurity, big data, and the technologies that are shaping the future. If you have questions, comments, or contributions, you can send us an email, jim@theaverageguy.tv. Of course, you can track down that guy down here, over there, up there, wherever he's at. You can send him an email, christian@theaverageguy.tv. TV. Find me on Twitter at Jay Collison, and Christian is at Borg Whisper. Of course, theaverageguy.tv. Powered by Maple Grove Partners. Get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting from people that you know and you trust. And plans start as little as $10 a month. WordPress optimized. Super awesome. MapleGrovePartners.com. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that as well. We're not super regular on this one, so this is one you want to just kind of leave in your podcast player. And then when we do have a new one, it'll just automatically pop in there for you. Christian, it's been, 4, 5, 6 weeks. Welcome back.
Thanks. It's the wild, wild west of podcasting out on the frontier. We know that there's something foul in the water when, after 10 years of being a loyal foot soldier for Windows 7 as my main operating system, I finally caved and upgraded it to Windows 10 over the weekend.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was a beautiful experience. It brought tears to my eyes.
Did you go to 1903?
I went straight to 1903, and then applied all of my customizations that are necessary when on a quasi-cloud like operating system. But yeah, fascinating times. I gotta admit, having an operating system that is 10 years of crud, so to speak, and all the software and the stuff the way I like it, I guess I will give kudos to the fact that at the end of the day, I have a working desktop with minimal changes in the stuff that got brought over. So end of the day, it was a success story. A few things I had to work out as sharp edges, but I am now in the new hot fangled era of running a cloud operating system as a private desktop. So it's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. How long did it take you?
It was a little over 2 hours to do the upgrade, because when you're doing an upgrade of a OS that buried, it's just going to sit for a while on doing that migration. And then it took me most of the following day on and off, just kind of throughout the day, making the tweaks and slowly unrolling the things that were carried over, but still a little bit incompatible. And I just rewired a bit. So all in all, really not that bad to kind of have a day of downtime in terms of productivity to address this, because there were particular apps I wanted to run on this workstation with the way the rest of my development environment is set up, and starting to hit that edge of, well, you're not on Windows 10, so suck it, you can't run it. So I took the bite. I should preface this to all the people who are abhorred that Microsoft is my main operating system, that I have different machines that are all my main operating systems. So I have a main Linux, a main Apple, and a main Windows environment at this point. But my main Windows environment that I've had for a very long time, I've intentionally left at Windows 7 for a very long time. And I think we've talked before that I've experimented with different machine images of Windows 10 on different test boxes that I had to really get comfortable with what I was seeing before taking the plunge. But I am proud that I held out 4 years since the release of Windows 10 before adopting it. I felt like I got to watch a lot of other users pain at my own pleasure and my own profit when it was time for me to do the upgrade. So
yeah, welcome to the world of Windows 10. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about maybe some of the issues, or Microsoft's having some security issues as well. I have been on the other end of it. I have been out in the insider community, at least on some of my boxes, for the better part of a couple of years. And I'm having a hard time telling what version is what anymore. I don't really even think of it. 1903 kind of came to my my office this last weekend. And so I spent a bunch of time kind of making sure all the PCs were upgraded. I had a little problem with one of them and one of the miners on burst. I had to completely redo some things. I had to roll it back, change some things, and then actually reinstall 1903. So here's the good news. That was all possible. So I rolled to 1903. It messed up the miner. And just insert the name of your program that didn't work, right? That's you can just say that, right? And exactly. Then I rolled it back in about 15 minutes. So just went into the settings, roll back, to 1809, change some things, kind of reset everything, and then upgrade it again, and it worked the second time. And so that's 1 out of 7 boxes that happened to. The rest of them upgraded really cleanly, including some of the boxes that I have that are slow and small storage they've really figured out how to get this You know, if you always had a 32 gig hard drive, so to speak, on some of these really small form factor PCs, the old Windows 10, you were kind of host. You'd have to do this song and dance and tap your head and
Yep.
you know, your belly. Now, they just work, which is kind of crazy. And so there are some good and bad, I think, to the upgrade cycle. I was going to wait again with 1903, just wait a couple weeks until it kind of forced me, or you know. And now they have a new with 1903. It's actually an option. It doesn't force you to do it. It kind of sits there in the update section and says, "Hey, when you're ready,
Yep.
you can update." It's like days of old, right? And so
It's a pause feature now, I think, is how
yeah, they
they
do.
count
They have a
it.
30 or 35-day pause too, even for home users now. You can do that. So if you haven't upgraded yet, I still might wait a little bit. You know,
Oh
if you
yeah.
don't have to,
I
in
have
night.
my settings set to wait because there's no bleeding edge feature that as an everyday user you must have the day it comes out with
Yeah,
Microsoft.
yeah. No, that's for sure. Christian, what Ken's kind of asking quickly, what are kind of some of those? If you can give us some idea of
Mhm.
what you want to disclose from how you kind of change it or how you modify it.
Yeah, so Microsoft actually provides a lot of tools both in the pre-Windows 10 days. You might have heard it as sysprep, which, believe it or not, still works in Windows 10, where basically you install a vanilla Windows 10 installation, and then you kind of customize all the bolts and nuts and widgets the way you want it, and then you create your own custom install image from the sysprep so that you don't have to redo all of the things when you set up a new Windows 10 box. And this is very common in the enterprise, right? You want to get the image that your enterprise organization is going to roll out, and that's the end of it. More common to see on enterprise editions, obviously, but you can image any type of licensed version of Windows, so the Pro, Home, etc., and you can create your own custom images of each of those, such that when it's time to plug and play your product key in, you're not redoing all that setup after Windows installs. It's just exactly the way you imaged it. So um, I had spent one of my Christian lab projects has been at kind of Q1 of 2019, was getting a sysprep environment set up and actually using VirtualBox to just kind of see what I really wanted out of a Windows 10 image. A lot of it was around the stability of it. So we talked about delaying Windows updates and making sure that instead of being on the bleeding edge channel, you're on the what they call the semi-annual release channel, which reduces the number of heavy hitting feature updates you're going to get to every 6 months. And then in addition to that, configuring it so that only security updates are the things that get applied immediately and feature updates get delayed by a minimum of up to a month. On the kind of cleanliness side of the house, I really don't like the cluttered look of when you install Windows 10 by default. That start menu is cluttered with a bunch of apps and tiles and just Microsoft UXP type apps running in the background that I'm not really interested in. I like more of the conventional Windows 7 desktop style. Um, so my image removes all of those tiles that are there by default, uninstalls all of the default Windows Store type applications that get bundled with the operating system, such that when I load my user profile, it's just the things I care about, and the start menu is decluttered, and I have a nice, clean, consolidated view. I also use a lot of the common privacy tools, whether it's Shut Up 10 or otherwise, to make sure I have a clean boot sequence, that I'm not sending more telemetry than I need to, etc. So there's a long laundry list there that I've been really spending some time researching and getting familiar with to understand what are the common sense things you can do that are low cost, high yield for having a cleaner operating system image to start with. And then there's also the edge device protection, really. So, I continue to be an avid PFSense user, really like the overall product that PFSense puts out. And I invest a lot of time into what I call whitelist based networking approaches. So that means really trying to get my network down to just the things I care about actually having come in and out of my network. And so blocking the unnecessary advertising has always been a traditional use case, but also blocking the unnecessary Microsoft support telemetry that I just don't need. So it's been an interesting learning scale, but that's kind of the realm of the things I'm looking at. I'm not really looking at, reinventing the wheel here, really just taking advantage of the settings that Microsoft is already providing that people might not be configuring out of the box. And then also just kind of applying some common sense hardening, reliability, and security scope to the OS.
Yeah, I'm sure no shock to most people, but I go the opposite direction, which is I try to keep everything just as absolutely stock as possible. I don't know. That has just over the last couple years that has worked really well for me. It drives my family crazy because my daughter will be like, "Don't you change anything?" And I'm kind of like, "No, actually, I want to try and just keep it as stock as possible." And even been trying to run most of the antivirus. 1903's got some new ransomware pieces, and try and keep it average. Average guy kind of thing. And so. That seems to work, or has worked for me. Got me thinking. Actually, not as many systems that I thought. I have 7 down here have upgraded to 1903 as I thought. So my main PC we're talking on here, I thought it upgraded. It's still 1809, and I need to do 1903 over the weekend. I think maybe I'll just leave it. I'm going to have 2 podcasts to produce, so I don't think I'm going to be screwing with it too much. All right, we came to talk some security. That's just kind of a good update on what's going on in the Windows world. Christian, I thought non-Windows systems were completely unhackable, right?
Yes,
they're completely.
Is
that true? I mean, is that true and honest? Are they completely?
Computer, it must be. It must be.
It's a non-Windows PC. It's completely safe, apparently.
Yeah. So this was something that is hot off the press this week. So exciting timeline with when we decided to record, but all the rage this week in the security industry is the Sack Panic. So you'll hear it referenced as a TCP Sack Panic. And this is actually discovered by the Netflix security team, which is pretty great. Excuse me. Netflix had published 4 CVEs all against this new realm of attack vector known as basically panicking the SACK stack. Now, what do I mean by that? So SACK stands for Selective TCP Acknowledgement, SACK. And this is really exciting. So, TCP is fundamental internet technologies, right? So really, in this case, we're talking pretty much all implementations of Linux and FreeBSD are impacted by this. I have not yet done the research as to why Microsoft and Apple's implementation of this specification didn't go down this same rabbit hole. But essentially, 2 types of networking transport layers in the world. You have TCP and UDP. Your TCP or your kind of reliable transport control protocol is going to be what all your websites, all your banking, all of the things that need an acknowledgement run off of. UDP is going to be your video streaming, your peer-to-peer things that I can send it and forget it. Like if I lose 1 pixel out of my 4K of pixels, I don't care if I lost that data frame. I'm never going to know the difference. So fundamental internet stack, I have to have a layer 4 transmission control protocol that whenever I request a website, the very first thing my computer does is it does what's called a TCP handshake. So I send my initial request, I get an acknowledgement back from the server saying, hey, I received your request, etc. And then I sync with parity by acknowledging that and sending my own synchronization request back. So this 3-way handshake is what ends up actually opening the connection where your computer can then request data from the web server in question. So this is very low in the stack in networking from a kernel perspective, because the kernel has to implement the kind of fundamental TCP IP driver stack that allows networking to happen at the operating system level. So that's kind of the fundamental backdrop here. What we're talking about specifically with a Sack Panic is the way the Linux operating system implements TCP. It kind of implements its own optimization known as selective TCP acknowledgement. So what happens is the whole reason we do an acknowledgement is so that if I lose a frame as the receiver of the data, I can re-request the frames that I missed. So let's say I'm looking for packets 1 through 20. And these packets, the whole point of TCP is that it gets reassembled in order. So the packets can fire, and I might get packet 54 and then packet 20 and then packet 1, etc. At the end of the day, what my computer has to do, because it can't guarantee order of delivery of those packet numbers, it has to sequentially reframe them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When it does that process of sequentially reordering them, it's going to look and say, either A, everything's there, great, I can move on with my life, or it's going to say, wait a second, I lost packet 21 for some reason. I need packet 21 back, okay? If we were to do this as a buffered approach where I send you like 1,500 packets at a time and you tell me if you got them all or not, and you were missing one in the middle, in a world where SAC doesn't exist in the Linux operating system, I would have to potentially resend a whole portion of that buffer as opposed to just that one packet that I'm missing in the control frame. So what SAC is doing is allowing the receiver of the data to notify the sender that, hey, I received an out of order segment. Like, for example, I received everything from 0 up through 8. And I expect number 9 next. But hey, I also received like 20 through 30. So that would mean, I'm going to need everything from 8 to 19 in order to give me everything in that range from 0 to 30. So rather than resending that whole thing, it's allowing me to selectively ask the sender of the data to give me these specific frames. What a Sack Panic is doing is the Sack is actually the Linux data structure that is, think of it as a socket buffer, more or less. And what that socket buffer can do is it can track at most up to 17 segments at a time. So as my machine is acknowledging packets that are being sent, data is being added and removed from the structure or perhaps consolidated. And in the process, the vulnerability that is being exploited here is that I am crafting TCP requests that have known problems in their stream in such a way that I can trick the Linux operating system into holding more than the 17 segments that should be in that data buffer. Now, Linux being the super secure Fort Knox that we all know and love, you don't want to have a buffer overflow. That data structure is in a very protected part of memory, etc. So if I'm suddenly outside of larger than the 17 segments that I'm supposed to be able to store in this part of the kernel, guess what? The Linux operating system goes into a kernel panic and the box resets. So it sounds like from one perspective, the security model works here. Hey, I had a fundamental problem with the data structure that exists down at the kernel level, and I, the operating system, realize I have a potential violation of my memory space, and I panic and I reboot. Awesome. Awful news is that because that panic can be insinuated from the outside of the operating system by me communicating with you over an IP-based internet network, I've fundamentally just created a mechanism to offer a distributed denial of service attack. So if you're a data center and you're running 10,000 Linux machines and I want to take your data center down, I can just start crafting these malicious packets, sending them to each one of your hosts. And because I will eventually hopefully be able to get that right sequence where your OS is going to store more than 17 frames in that buffer, one by one, your instances are going to start kernel panicking and rebooting. So I can directly impact the availability of your service, and I can do it in a widespread manner. So this is really a fantastical new attack vector, because when we think about the types of DOS attacks that we see today, many of them have been crafted at the HTTP server level. And so the fact that we're seeing something down at layer 4 as opposed to layer 7 really excites me. And the fact that it gets right into the low-level kernel as opposed to the web server is also very exciting. It's not necessarily that you're gaining access to the machine or anything like that, but the fact that I have this very low-level raw mechanism that's accessible remotely to impact the running state of your box, that's a very powerful tool. Because smart Linux wizards know that this is a very powerful tool. These things get embargoed ahead of time. The vendors like Netflix that discover these things responsibly disclose them, talk to the internal Linux kernel community on best ways to go forth about patching and correcting them. And by the time they release something of this magnitude, all your core big providers have already been patched. So this is not something that is running out in the wild, just ready for the taking. Obviously, if you run your own infrastructure, or you're small to medium business, or you're doing some type of hosting of your own, definitely make sure you go get your latest upstream kernel patch and reboot if you're in a Linux environment. But if you're on your major cloud providers, this is an already mitigated issue for you. But really a fantastic, I don't know, I get really excited about new ways of thinking about attack vectors to old problems. Like DDoS is a very old problem. It's a very well-defined problem. To me, it's a very exhausting problem because DOS is boring for the most part. This kind of brought a new tasty way of thinking about DOS that was very exciting. And, it really kind of reminded me as at a smaller scale, but reminded me of a network version of Spectre and Meltdown, only in the sense that Spectre and Meltdown brought a very new way of thinking about attacking computer hardware in a way that's fundamentally changing how we think about designing kernel architectures. Now we're talking about a network vulnerability that's making us think about how we implement kernel architectures properly. So this hit it out of the park for me as newsworthy this week, and I really enjoyed following this.
Christian, something like PFSense, which would it be affected by something like this? Is that, or for the average user, if they were using that, would it show up or no?
Yeah, great point. So maybe some folks don't know that PFSense is built off of the FreeBSD operating system, and the FreeBSD operating system is in the scope of vulnerabilities. I don't believe FreeBSD. So there were 4 variations of this that came out. I believe FreeBSD, I know, was at least vulnerable to one of the 4. I'm not sure about the other 3 precisely. However, the implication here is that you as a PFSense user would need to be allowing some kind of inbound traffic that uses TCP, either forwarding to something on the PFSense box or forwarding to an internal client that's running Linux. So yeah, maybe there's some possibilities, but probably low impact for PFSense in the sense that it's rare for a PFSense user, especially a home PFSense user, to expose things that are running directly on the gateway. Oftentimes, the gateway is being used to forward to internal services downstream that may be impacted by it. I'm not sure if the process of doing NAT translation would also impact the PFSense kernel as well. That is possible. But you would basically need to have a lot of different services that a malicious actor knew about that you were forwarding on your gateway that they were then sitting there and playing with. So
Ken asks in chat, like, what about remote web admin access? Is that something that would?
Yeah,
you've opened up the port.
So web is TCP. So in a way, is it possible? Yes, but like remote web access, when I hear that word, I think Microsoft Remote Web Access, which is a Windows kernel. So the downstream server isn't going to get impacted. At worst, if there is the ability for NAT forwarding to also be impacted in this way in the PFSense kernel, your PFSense gateway might be the thing that panics and reboots, not the remote web access server.
And we're not talking about malicious access to the box. We're talking about either consuming resources, right? So CPU spikes, or it reboots, and I guess you could continue to attack it. It would reboot, come back on, attack it, reboot, come back on, right? So it's constantly going through a reboot cycle. Would there be a way to discover this vulnerability? I mean, could you scan systems and see if it's running a particular instance and not patched, and then be able to run something against it? Would that be possible?
Yeah, so far there's they've published what kernel versions have the fix. So you should be able to go and find and see if your current Linux version is running an exploited version. I do PFSense updates pretty regularly, and I'm just going to check right now real quick while we're live on air, but I don't believe I've seen the downstream patch come out for FreeBSD yet, which means that PFSense getting its patches from FreeBSD for something like this, I'm not seeing it yet in the PFSense dashboard as something they've pushed as a critical security update. So either they've identified that it's not going to impact this scenario, or the version of FreeBSD in the latest PFSense is version 11.2.x of the FreeBSD kernel. So I'd have to check and look at those versions and see what's going on. But
Joe brings up Unraid. That's another real popular piece of software in our community that is based on one of these variants. I don't know which one. Would that fall into the same boat? Not many are putting their Unraid servers in public facing, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and again, you have to ask yourself, like, why would an attacker want to DOS your home Unraid server, right? Like, we're talking about people who would want to go after like large websites or cloud infrastructure, or manage things where it's in their interest to take it down, right? There's not much profit motive or reason to go after home users in this particular exploit.
Yeah, with many more players in much bigger situations, this would be a situation, right? They're not going to get any information, but they could begin to just wreak havoc. Speaking of wreaking havoc, Target has been the target of havoc.
Target.
I hate they paid what $160 million or something like this in fines the last time. That now no breach, so to speak, no customer information, but they've certainly had trouble taking people's money. And social has turned on them. Like the last week or two, or whenever this, whenever this was, has not been kind to them. Talk a little bit about what's going on there at Target.
Yeah, so I kind of call it the false flag operation, right? I think when this headline first hit over the weekend, people were like, "Oh my gosh, Target breach!" And it turned out just to be literally an outage for several hours, for sure, and then it, I believe, happened again a second time, for a second day in a row. And really, I mean, obviously there's customer impact of, I got to go to an ATM, get out cash, etc., to complete my purchase. That's not a great customer experience. But Target says in a statement yesterday that it confirmed it was not a data breach or security related issue, and that, quote, no guest information was compromised at any time. What's really fascinating is that this looked and smelled like all the ingredients for, walking data breach coming through the front door. The reality was, the company blamed an outage on a, quote, internal technology issue without disclosing specifics. Of course, those specifics were later rumor wheeled in a USA Today article that came out on the 16th of June. And they basically attributed it to a vendor known as NCR, and again, saying it wasn't specific to the Target technology system, but again, that's for the first outage. Not much information about the second outage, and really some kind of bland, boring commentary in that article about the fact that weekends are a normal maintenance window for IT shops. So this is normal for most people, except when you're retail, your biggest shoppers are coming in on the weekends. So like maybe you don't want to have that kind of upgrade cycle. But one of the things that fascinates me about this, and I think of it more just from a putting on my software engineering hat and not my security hat, is designing systems that are fault tolerant, right? And it's a nice maxim to have. I think any software engineer will concede that it always sounds good on paper. It's always harder in practice. Building systems that are truly fault tolerant, redundant, and scalable, you're bound to have at some point some what we call sharp edges or learning pains in growing with that. And it's going to vary by the maturity of the organization developing that type of software. What's notable to me about this is that the type of IT maintenance outage could cause this type of widespread inability to process payments. And I guess what I mean by that in a way is, when you think about a lot of small mom and pop shops or other places that do credit card transactions, some of those folks do online processing, right? They have the little handheld thing and they jam in the credit card and so forth. And yet it's very effective in the sense that offline payment infrastructure then connects and process payments, etc. You would think if an organization as large as Target had some type of central based outage that, let's just say, impacted connectivity, that there would still be local site redundancy for that particular store to get out and do transactions through an alternative payment gateway or through a separate system, or queue up those transactions and wait for the recovery, so that, yeah, you might be taking a risk on if someone's credit card gets declined for some reason, and then you don't have that payment info and the customer's walked out, etc. But it's an interesting dialogue on, like, A, what is the customer experience, and B, when talking about payment processor technology, what are the ways that in-store retailers are solving the problem of redundant payment gateways? Because that type of outage smells very much like you're relying on one single vendor to provide this big layer of, like, underlying backbone for you, and you don't really have a plan B if that backbone goes out. And that's not an exciting, warm and fuzzy feeling as a customer to see. So, and again, I'm speculating only in the absence of Target providing more data on what actually happened, right? But these are the types of questions I immediately start to ask as an engineer.
Yeah. And you might have a backup system that takes 6 hours to get, you think of the outage of being a major outage. You're going to be out for a day. You're going to have a backup scenario, but it may take 6 to 9 hours for that to deploy through the system. We know store forward or batch, keeping batch doesn't work. That was an experiment that banks and retail tried in the 90s and early 2000s. And customers and fraud, people who do fraud would regularly wait for those kinds of situations. We just talked about DDoS. Maybe attack a system, take it down, and then go in knowing that the store would go to a payment system of saying, well, we're going to limit it to $200. And all of a sudden, every transaction's $200, and massive fraud takes place. It is interesting, Christian, and that redundancy of being able to do a fast failover to the payment processing systems are expensive, gigantic fees, and lots of technology, especially if you think about a Target. Think about Walmart. Like, if something like this, be interesting to know what they do with their infrastructure. Target certainly is that next rung up, and a lot of people shop at Target just because they won't shop at Walmart for whatever reasons, and probably good ones. But it is, I agree with you. It's an interesting, I think, study, especially in large retail, big box stores. It's been a while since we've heard of an outage like this where they just couldn't take credit cards. Here's the funny thing about this. They still took cash. So it's not like you couldn't buy anything. But we as a consumer, nobody carries cash anymore. Right. It's just one of those, we have really gotten down to that point where cash just isn't. And somebody pulled out cash the other day and was paying with it. I'm like, what is that? Like, I haven't seen cash in 3 or 4 years, it feels like, right? Or carried it around. It's weird to have $1 in my pocket to go across the bridge here in Bellevue. So super interesting. One of the statements that's Eric Schmidt, the Chief Information Security Officer at Butler University in Indianapolis, who's quoted in this article, and you quoted it too. Wasn't surprised. Sometimes maintenance goes on over the weekend, but he says, hey, sometimes upgrades don't go as planned. NCR, the vendor, is probably the one responsible. I guarantee you there are people at NCR. They're a real popular payment processing vendor. I guarantee you there are people whose jobs are in jeopardy at the moment when you just think about the millions of dollars or potential dollars lost in a couple hours at Target. It's got to be huge. Interestingly enough, Target's last widespread register outage happened June 15th, 2014. Exactly 5 years to the day.
There you have
right?
There you have it.
That's
It's like the
kinda
stars align.
that is kind of scary. So I'm actually surprised it doesn't happen more often, but maybe the big box stores, the Walmarts, the Targets, if you fill in the blanks, Home Depot, Office Depot, Lowe's, some of those stores, Best Buy. I don't know. Maybe they've got more of a backup system, like you're saying. That's in place. We started the show by talking about some Microsoft updates. Christian, you say in the notes here, roll up of recent Microsoft security events as well. You've got a few things to cover when it comes to our friends in Redmond.
Yeah, there's been interesting things going on. You've seen a lot of security patching come out in the last 6 weeks from Microsoft. I guess I'll highlight a couple on the show tonight. The two that I'm thinking of right now are both RDP related, actually. The first one was that in beginning of the month in June, Microsoft dismissed a reported bug as a quote unquote feature, which is the favorite term engineers say when they really want you to believe a bug is a feature. That's not a bug, that's a feature.
We like to say an undocumented feature.
Yeah, an undocumented feature, exactly. And so this particular bug was disclosed at a CERT at Carnegie Mellon, and it stems from basically network level authentication. And that's a mechanism that really allows you to protect your Windows machine at the time you are enabling and using the remote desktop protocol. And specifically, it prevents remote login to the machine without first having that machine authenticate itself on the network and say, I am this machine, trust this machine, etc. With the release of Windows 10 1903, Microsoft changed the way network level authentication works to basically cache the client's login on the RDP host so that you can basically have a quick resume login if you lose connectivity. What's interesting about that is that, and again, this is also paraphrasing Sophos, which did a really nice write-up on this. We'll include it in the show notes. The change enables an attacker to circumvent the lock screen in that scenario where the credential gets cached. So an example of something that doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you think about how many times in an enterprise have you had to press Control-Alt-Delete before you can get to your login screen, the reason for that is in my opinion, for this very thing of like not being able to be in a state where something can remotely coerce either a cached credential or in the case of Control-Alt-Delete, part of it is actually to bypass the ability for something on the machine to act as a keylogger or bypass keystrokes, right? Actually have physical presence at the machine before a password can be entered. And it also, a lot of enterprises integrate with multi-factor authentication. So this also would result in bypassing that because you'd be using these cache credentials. And of course, Microsoft responds by explaining this is a feature, not a bug. And we actually, they quote, it is, quote, what you are observing is Windows Server honoring network level authentication, which requires user credentials to allow connections to proceed in the earliest phase of connection. Those same creds are used logging the user into a session or reconnecting. As long as it's connected, the client will cache the credentials used for connecting and reuse them when it needs to auto reconnect so it can bypass NLA. But these colleagues kind of dispute. It's very interesting where security industry runs up against Microsoft, and they, almost, I would say, north of 95% of these types of disclosures would be immediately addressed. The fact that there was pushback on this one, kind of interesting anecdote. So take it for what you will. This is interesting because preceding this, 2 weeks prior, in the middle of May, Microsoft just kind of drops a cute little bombshell on the TechNet blog entitled "Prevent a Worm by Updating Remote Desktop Services." And I'll kind of paraphrase the blog post, but quote, "Today Microsoft released a fix for critical remote code execution vulnerability in remote desktop services." So this was the legacy terminal services component of many older Windows operating systems. RDP itself is not vulnerable. Again, another pre-authentication layer. But what's scary about this is that the vulnerability is wormable, meaning that future malware that can exploit this vulnerability could then propagate to other machines very quickly, like you would see with ransomware, and how quickly that it spread back in 2017. More interesting is that vulnerable in support systems include Windows 7, 2008 R2, etc. And you can find downloads for those versions to patch and update them. But there's also out of support versions like Server 03 and XP. So, you'd still be amazed how many people run those operating systems. And those folks, the guidance is, hey, you got to get to a real operating system. So you would have seen this come out as an emerging monthly or quarterly security update on the Windows 7 update line. But interestingly is that this was partially mitigated by having proper network level authentication enabled. So a lot of interesting stuff like this going on with Microsoft. In general, I've seen a combination of these types of exploits coming out against Microsoft operating systems in combination with bad Windows update patches for Windows 10. One of the inherent reasons why I'm, have always been very skeptical about the operating system and its kind of continuous development and integration into home users' lives. So it's interesting. The end state in many cases is that like some of the Microsoft updates are causing just as much productivity harm as potential vulnerabilities and exploits that industry has to go deal with. So it's also been a very hot month for the Microsoft platform in general when we talk about the types of security updates that have been coming down the pike.
Anything? I'd heard that maybe there was some 0-day exploit out there as well.
Yeah, that great call out. So that was probably the bigger one of the ones that I talked about so far. One of the security researchers known as Sandbox Escaper, her or she is not really a known entity, and she's very well known for just dumping stuff out in the wild that isn't responsibly disclosed. So in the past, stuff that she's disclosed, you have seen in the wild in real attacks. She had supposedly 4 local privilege escalation 0 days last year that were all just pushed out into the wild. And the first one that she did in 2018 was a vulnerability in local procedure call stack, and that one was used in active malware campaigns for weeks after its release. Which, how exciting! But this particular vulnerability that also came out in the end of May timeframe, so we missed a lot of Cyber Frontiers goodness on the end of May timeframe. But this is again, we're talking in the realm of local privilege escalation. So the vulnerability by itself doesn't buy you anything, but attackers again try to collect and aggregate a series of vulnerabilities in their toolkit such that once they get initial access on a box through some vector that offers minimal privileges, they can use another vulnerability that's aka local privilege escalation to then get broader access to the box and keep drilling down. So according to the description in this one, the vulnerability actually resides in Windows Task Scheduler, which is really fascinating because the attackers can run a mailform job that basically exploits the flaw in the way Task Scheduler processes access control list permissions for files, and that allows the hacker to escalate a low privilege system account to admin access, which in turn gives you the whole kit and caboodle. What's also fascinating is that the 0-day was only originally tested for Windows 10 32-bit, but Task Scheduler and the code base that makes up Windows Task Scheduler goes all the way back to Windows XP. And so I don't think it would take very much at all for this 0-day to be adapted to work across the Windows operating system platform. And again, you run into that scenario where if you get it to work back in those old operating systems that are no longer supported, or you have a case where like Windows 7 is still used by a big chunk of the community, and it's going to go end of life at the end of this year. So they'll stop issuing security updates for that OS. You get another local privilege escalation like this, now it becomes even more powerful, because now you're potentially looping in all those Windows 7 OSs that haven't been upgraded yet, that also are local privilege escalation capabilities. So what a time to be alive. One of the things that reminds me about Windows 10 is that as much as it's become a cloud operating system, the Windows operating system is very much a living, breathing organism, down to the point where there are some components that still exist in Windows 10 to this day that you could probably go back and find very, very early on implementations of in Windows 2000, maybe even further back into some of the Windows NT type stuff. You won't see a lot of that anymore, but still some of it. I'm also reminded by a very old school game I play that's been out since 1998 called Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds. Most geeks will know it by the name of Age of Empires 2, which was an iconic game engine that Microsoft came out with back in the days of Windows 98 and onward. And this ran off of what was called Microsoft Direct Play, which was pre-DirectX. So all your hot games today run off DirectX 12. They have all these advanced graphics capabilities that game producers use, and all the graphics cards leverage that DirectX standard when providing you these amazing 4K views. Old school games like Age of Empires runs on Direct Play, which is pre-DirectX 8. So think old school graphical environment. Believe it or not, Microsoft is nice to the kindred geeks like myself, and they offer legacy component support for Direct Play in a modern Windows 10 operating system. So they literally have ported code that has existed for a minimum of 20 years, if not more, because I think it did go back. I think its early roots were either at the end of Windows 95 or the beginning of Windows 98, a little spotty on that. But TLDR, code lives, breathes, persists, and iterate over time. And then on top of that, Microsoft has this huge push for ensuring compatibility on their platforms, in their modern day platforms, which is one of the things I actually appreciate about Windows 10. The result of that is that if you can find a vulnerability that kind of goes back all the way through that history, you can now thread the needle of time and create local privilege escalations that kind of work across the iterative stack of Microsoft operating systems.
Do I need, as a user, do I need to be concerned about these, these 0 day?
Not as much. If you're on a modern operating system like Windows 10 and you are immediately accepting those security patches and not delaying them, like the feature patches, which I kind of do recommend to users who want stability, then you're covered from stuff like this. It's from people who are not doing updates or are on pre-Windows 10, where it's, for the most part, people would maybe download updates but not install them and so forth. Yeah, that's where the concern starts to bake in more and more.
Okay. And to be fair, we blasted a little bit on Microsoft, but Google has not been without its issues as well. I haven't heard about these, so
yeah,
thanks for bringing them up.
Oh yeah, and switching the spectrums, going back to lack of availability. This has kind of been Google's MO over the last month. They had two pretty bad events. One, they had a major outage of Google the Google Cloud platform, which was not ideal because obviously, like, once Google invests all this money into building their own Google Cloud, you can bet on it that Google's going to then build all their services on top of that cloud and so forth. So they had virtually all of the Google stack from like a customer perspective, like Google Drive, Google Calendar, et cetera, were like all red at the beginning of June. And it was due to a networking issue from an upstream L3 provider that somehow really just took down a link that Google ate it pretty hard. And additionally, a Google employee anonymously reported that it disrupted also their internal tooling that they use to communicate about company outages. So it was also paralyzing their internal response to be able to deal with this issue. And this is not just Google, to be clear. In January, a similar level 3 outage had caused auth stack to go down for all of Microsoft Azure. So it's a possibility thing. This is why you have redundant links, redundant service providers, etc. So unclear to me specifically why this network outage was not something they could reroute around quickly, but it did take down a big, broad spectrum of their ability to authenticate and log into your Google, use your Google services. Gmail was down for a couple hours, etc. And then like a ringing from the past, on June 18th, which was yesterday, the day before recording this show, Google Cloud and G Suite had another uptime sputter where Google Calendar was down for quite some period of time. And, at least it was scoped to just the calendar in this case. But it's been a availability challenge for Google in the last few weeks. Two incidents don't necessarily seem related, but definitely calls into question what's the source of some of these availability concerns for Google.
Well, and it gets a little sticky when now Google, who owns Nest, has devices that can connect that you're trying to maybe unlock or get security information from, or get, alerts of things that are going on, that when you have outages like this, could it affect the AC shuts off in your house, right? And it's 115 degrees outside. Does that seem to be a problem?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things is, of course, now we have all these newfangled Internet of Things devices. And if you went and bought a Google Nest, you weren't able to really control your thermostat, or in some cases, even unlock your doors. So welcome to the chaos of Internet of Things when it's all powered by the cloud. So really crazy.
On Saturday morning at 5 a.m., I am woken up by my wife, who says, "Hey, have you heard this crash?" I'm like, "No, I was sleeping, but there was a crash." She's like, "Yeah, I heard this, and then the power went off." And so everything was out in the house. And so, I don't know. We went around. All my UPSs are beeping, right? And so I go down, computers are still running, which is great. My UPSs worked, right? So I safely shut them down, send a few notes to folks, and say, I'm going back to bed. So 5:30, I'm back in bed. About 8 or so, I get up. Power is still off. She goes to the store to do some stuff. It comes on about 8:30. And sure enough, a garbage truck had lost control and run into a pole just down the street. Taken out power. This doesn't happen very often. Took out the pole and the internet. Power came up about 8:30. Internet didn't come up till close to noon. I ended up running into work to do Ask the Podcast Coach on Saturday morning. But it was one of those things where the power came up, all the, the Amazon devices came on, everything was up, but we couldn't turn on lights with our voice. We couldn't, there's all that automation didn't work because I didn't have an internet connection. And that kind of got me thinking, like, okay, I need to have a really viable option. You mentioned NCR and Target and having a backup. I probably need to think a little bit better about my internet backup solution. So thinking through, what would I do to get my phone now put in the, in between the modem and the router for the house. What could I do, Christian? And maybe I'll just ask you, this is not in the show notes. What should I do if I wanted to use my phone to run the whole house at that point? What do you think are my options to kind of insert that in between without having to do a bunch of mumbo jumbo, to get it done?
Yeah, so I kind of believe in if you're really like in that home geek mode and you have something like a PFSense, and actually I don't do this today, so I guess I can't recommend testimonials to it, but if you have a device that can do Wi-Fi, and you put a Wi-Fi card in your PFSense box, which is acting as your gateway for everything else, then when you have an outage and you have something like an iPhone on Verizon that has unlimited data and can hotspot, you set your PFSense gateway to Wi-Fi connect to your phone's hotspot, and then your whole house is lit up against that phone connection. So if you need to temporarily get out for a period of time and you're not dealing with cables, that's a very fast way to not have to disturb any of the devices in your home, but have them get out some type of internet connection. Now, you're not going to want to have 20 devices go Netflix streaming off of that, and you're going to have to be careful of your data caps, but at least it will allow people to stay on the internet and get things like their Nest and so forth when your local internet fiber is cut.
Yeah. Now I've taken PFSense out, and I have just a bit Defender box that I'm using. I really, really like. But maybe that's a case to have a piece of hardware sitting around waiting for that moment to say, okay, I'm going to insert this in, turn it on, insert it in, connect it to my phone, and then get connected to the internet. Joe's asking, wasn't that the selling point of Habitat? That was a vendor we had on that kind of simplifies or brings together all of this. None of the Alexa devices would connect to and listen to us. Even with no internet, they don't work. They don't take commands, even on the local network, which is kind of interesting, Christian. Talk about fault tolerance. How cool would it be that even these Amazon devices would somehow, even offline, have something in them? You talk about caching or something to say, okay, I understand I'm on a local network. While I don't have internet, I'll still kind of work for the home automation stuff that's around me. I mean, that certainly that doesn't work today. And I don't know about that for Google. I'm pretty sure no internet, nothing works. These devices have to make a connection back home to do their thing. But kind of interesting to think, what would it take for them to at least have minimal operation mode with no internet?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, something to think about. One more in Facebook, and man, this is one I have noticed because I run all these Facebook groups, both for the average guy.tv and what I do for Gallup. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I have just seen all these fake accounts pop up, and then people jumping in. If you do let them in, then some of them look pretty real. And I'm not surprised Facebook's having a hard time getting all of them. They're getting lots of them, but some are getting through. They do look real. And then, of course, they immediately advertise jobs or porn or whatever as soon as they get into the group. So what's going on over there?
Yeah, so I mean, what would it be if we didn't end Cyber Frontiers with me continuing my rail against Facebook? So this was also end May timeframe, May 23rd. The Associated Press reported that fake account removals doubled in 6 months to 3 billion. 3 billion. Okay, there's 7 billion people on the planet, of which probably 6 billion or so are eligible internet users, which means that 50% of the world's population was represented at its fake accounts in a way. And so this was over a October to March timeframe, which was twice as many as the previous 6 months. All of them were nearly all of them were caught before they had a chance to become, quote, active, etc. But what that tells me is that the platform is continuing to get abused. There's certainly continued value for people to get on this platform and manipulate it, either through phishing or other campaigns and so forth. Kind of continues my trend though of like I see the death of the Facebook platform as being somewhat imminent. You've probably seen some reporting on WhatsApp lately that'll make you scratch your head. You've probably seen some other things that Facebook owns that makes you scratch your head. And then, of course, the ultimate head scratcher. So the last Cyber Frontiers show, I think I talked a little bit about how I was blown away that, Facebook, who has done a lot of trust damage to their user base, suddenly announced they were going to be this great provider of secure encrypted private messaging, which is the antithesis of what Facebook's MO has been with your data all along. And then out of left field, as if that wasn't as fantastical enough, Facebook announces their own cryptocurrency this week. And it's like, what? Like, really? We're going here? And so they announced this Libra cryptocurrency and all these new use cases and how they won't fully control it, but they'll just kind of get this one vote and there'll be a governance model and they want it to be the future of PayPal. And, this all sounds the super well and good, happy next iteration. I guarantee you this is a giant distraction to like get into some new technology, change their branding and their scope of what Facebook does. I haven't the faintest idea if I really have. This just hit me, so I can't really give a fair assessment other than to say the gut reaction here is like they're getting in the blockchain game a little bit late. It doesn't mean they don't have really smart people to go and do these things, but I can't trust them with very basic things anymore. Why am I suddenly going to trust them to then deal with all my quote unquote finances? And there's huge risk here. I mean, you think about what happened with some of the data that was leaked from Facebook in the last few years, and you can only imagine the type of data that could be at risk if Facebook gets into this kind of financial market in this way. Now, their big spin on this is that they claim that it's going to, quote, Libra will empower fans in underserved markets by enabling financial inclusion. I know that's a great marketing pitch. I just don't know what that means yet. Like, I don't know how you put this in the hands of underserved populations and how they're going to intrinsically benefit from it. So call me a skeptic, but this seems like a huge distraction that may actually just work because it's just so wild and fantastically out of the box to where Facebook has been the last couple of years. They might get some serious attention on this. I don't know. But they certainly have done nothing to earn my trust back with their regular stuff. And this doesn't help put them in the plus column in that respect.
It has been great for cryptocurrency. Let's just be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the crypto markets have been doing pretty well without this, but they did move a little bit on this announcement.
Bitcoin's back up to almost
9,200 as of right now. Which is double what it had been.
June 5th, so 2 weeks ago, it was about 1,500 less. So
yeah. No, it's moved. It's moved nicely. I don't, who knows if that Facebook, it had been moving before this announcement pretty nicely. But no, Christian, I actually agree with you. I have been kind of on the other side of your Facebook negativity of saying, I use it a ton. I'm in it for work, some of those kinds of things. But it's getting harder and harder for me to, we use it for groups, and groups are kind of the one enclave because you can control them so tightly. Where we actually get good usage out of it. There's no ads in it for the most part. You're not getting my users. We have about 13,000 in a group that I'm in. The folks that I kind of help manage there, they have to deal with Facebook on a daily basis outside of that. And so do I, right? And the other day I was over at a buddy's house on Friday. We were talking about Traeger grills. The next day, my Facebook feed is just full. I didn't search for it. I didn't look for it. We were just talking about it. And my phone was even in the house. The next day, all kinds of Home Depot ads for, guess what? Traeger grills. Like, you're just like, damn you, Facebook.
Love it.
So, and I've even turned off I've turned everything off, Christian, on my phone to it. And it's just too much of a coincidence, but it will be interesting to see where we go with this. It does add an interesting element back to crypto in some regards, where it's saying, oh, okay, well now maybe, and over the last 2 years, Visa, MasterCard, even PayPal, some of these financial companies have spent a bunch of time looking at crypto and not doing anything with it, but looking at it, saying what could be done in these. And so quietly behind the scenes, a lot have gone on in the blockchain. Some players have left. Some bad actors have moved away. I don't know. Maybe this is blockchain 2.0.
Hey, if they really believe it, go for it.
Well, I don't think this has any, like I said this, I don't know. I don't think Facebook moving to crypto is what's going to do it. Like nobody trusts them anyways. But I do, it is interesting that I think over time, the blockchain itself has been working out some of the kinks and some of the bugs and has gotten a little more legitimate in the sense of just time. and figuring some things out. And like I said, some of the bad actors have dropped out. and said, I'm going to move on to the next thing, whatever that is, and has left the community a little more stable. This rise in crypto or in Bitcoin and some of the other coins that go along with it has been pretty controlled and not very, not the crazy up and downs that we saw back in, fall of 2017. So who knows with that being said, anything else, Christian?
No, I think that's a wrap. Definitely a quick journey through hopefully the highlights of the last 6 weeks, but there was a lot.
So. Highlights or lowlights, right? One of the two.
Indeed.
Yeah. Anything you, as you look ahead, anything that from that you're keeping your eyes on, or some things that you're finding interesting that you don't want to go in depth on, but you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I'm definitely keeping my eye on AI news because cyber kind of drowned out the news for me the last few weeks. My eye has been a little bit diverted, but I continue to think that when we talk about the big growth curves of technology, right? Like 5 years ago, cyber was on this big upward growth curve, and I think AI is really starting to hit that same growth curve now. So you're going to see a lot more of the cyber frontiers, so to speak. The frontier is naturally going to be getting more and more defined on those ridges of the AI, because there's definitely a lot of movement in that space right now. So I'm keeping my eyes out there quite keenly. I'm also quite interested to see if any new kind of standards come out, right? We've seen a lot of technology moving and iterating on top of known stacks, known capabilities, etc. I'm keeping my eye out for anything out of academia that could be a new way of thinking or a new way of optimizing ourselves through some of these problems. I need to find and pull into our next show. There was an article I had seen a few weeks ago on a research paper where a student had provided a new mechanism for, so there are, you might have heard of like NP problems in computer science, or NP hard problems, or basically problems that would take a computer longer than many, many lifetimes to solve. And there are both solving the problem right, and then there's also verifying that the solution to the problem is correct. And so computer scientists are actually interested in both. They're interested in the time it takes to solve things that are infinite time, for a broad way to think about it, in order to solve. And then they're also interested in verifying correct outputs or correct answers in something that's less than infinite time. And this student had come up with a new way to add a whole new class of computer science theory problems and make very simplistic ways to answer those scale of problems and verify them in very small time using, everyone's all about, oh, quantum's going to crack this nut on so many different things, but no, it was a standard conventional binary system that unlocked this whole new space of things that previously we weren't able to solve. So I'm kind of waiting to see if there's any particular algorithmic advancements that put us to the next place, because I think we're going to continue to get clever engineering wise. There's a lot of things to still engineer and iterate on. I'm waiting to see where the research field moves next, because that's going to kind of tell us how fast or slow we see some of the things we've been talking about in the 10 to 50 year horizon.
You mentioned AI, and that got me immediately thinking about that Boston Dynamics parody video. Did you see that about the robot? And have you seen that video?
I have.
Okay, so if you're at home, go to Google or go to YouTube and search Boston Dynamics parody. And in the video, they have a robot, and the robot is throwing boxes. It's walking, it's stepping up and stepping down, and it's throwing some boxes around. And then they start attacking it. They throw balls at it. They got a hockey stick. They beat this thing down with like a hockey stick, right?
I've seen them do that. I guess it's not in this video yet.
Well, in this video, it's a little over the top. Like at first, they start like generic enough that you're like, oh, this may be, you don't think it's fake. Yeah. But as they progress through, you're like, oh my God, are they really doing this at Boston Dynamics? Because they've come out with some pretty wacky videos, right? About some of the robot stuff that they're working on, some of the AI stuff they're working on. And then at the very end, the robot, well, I won't give it away. It won't be a spoiler. Let's just, I won't, you'll have to go out and watch the video, but it is hilarious. It's much better if you saw it before you knew it was a parody. And then, of course, there is now a bunch of videos coming out about how they did that, how they filmed that, the CGI that they did. It looks dead real. And at first you're thinking, wow, they're getting really good with these robots. And then you realize it's actually human, that's putting up with this. But super cool. So when you said AI, I thought, oh boy, we're still a little ways away from where I think we are. And but Boston Dynamics, thank you for that bit of humor. A little alarming at first. I felt bad for the robots for a second. I was like, wow, okay, guys, do you really need to be that angry? Lots of comments about this is when the robots take over. When we start doing these kinds of things to them, they're definitely coming back after us. So pretty funny and pretty cool. With that, we'll remind everyone, theaverageguy.tv, powered by Maple Grove, maybe not powered by robots, but soon to be someday. Maple Grove Partners, web hosting. Get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting from people that you know and you trust. For more information, visit Maple Grove Partners. You got room for a few more people over there, Christian?
Oh, please do. Yeah, we're at capacity and ready for new orders. So.
All right, sounds good. MapleGrovePartners.com. We welcome your questions. You can send us an email. I'm Jim at theaverageguy.tv. Although, just send them to Christian at theaverageguy.tv. And we'd love to get those answered on the next show. Want to thank you for joining us. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
Good night.
All right. Wow, I didn't think we were going to be able to get through all that material, but
yeah, we blew through it.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Good stuff. Good chat room too. Good job, guys. Appreciate you guys coming out on short notice.
Yeah, thanks for coming out, guys.
Kevin was wondering if Google is hosting Target's cash registers.
Yeah, great question. I think not.
That would have been a good. That would have been a good one indeed. Oh, I'm kind of winded.
No, a lot of talking. I got through my whole seltzer and.
I know. No, it's good. I got to do this again tomorrow night. And actually, I have 2 podcasts. So this will be, I'll do 4 podcasts in 2 days, starting tonight. So I have 1 tonight. I have 2 in the morning, back to back, then 1 tomorrow night. So get them in and get them done. And I'll have to think about how I set up that redundant backup. Although, you set those up and you never use them. And then 3 years goes by, you have a power outage or an internet outage. You go to turn the thing on, it won't even turn on because you almost have to build it in so you use it or it's there. Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to have a box. I don't want to build another PFSense box. Like I just don't want the
building PFSense boxes.
I know. They're easy. They're not that hard. I could probably put one in between my Bitdefender box and the modem. Mm-hmm. Just let it sit there. Just be a pass-through, basically. I could put a few things on it that would traffic monitoring and some of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Could probably build it in a Docker. Probably be the right thing to do. Yeah, Joe, I know I can buy one. I just don't. I can build one just as easy. They're just, I don't know. Have to think about it. Have to think about it. All right, gents. Thanks for coming out tonight. Christian, hang tight for 1 second.
Good night, everyone.
We won't be doing much of a post show, but guys, we'll see you tomorrow night, 8 for Home Gadget Geeks. We'll see you guys back here tomorrow.